So what is it that they say about being careful when you meet your heroes? Something like never meet your heroes, they'll surely disappoint you. And I think that as guitar players, we all have our hero list, those pieces of gear that we lust after, sometimes for years, thinking that surely this will be the ultimate guitar, or the ultimate amp, that once we get it, we'll never need another amp or guitar ever again. And let's be honest with ourselves. I think that every single one of us have been through that mental space over the years, and I've met my hero equipment a few times. My Parker Mojo Fly, my Bogner Ecstasy Classic that I had, several Mesas, and I've been let down every single time for one reason or the other. And you'd think that after so many expensive mistakes that I would learn my lesson, but here we are again, flirting closely with the definition of insanity. Hey guys, welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome to my channel. And if you enjoy the content that you hear, consider subscribing to help my channel grow and to help get these videos out there to new viewers just like yourself. So here we have it, the final form of Randall Smith's incredible Mark Series amplifier, the legendary Amp Builder's magnum opus, the swan song, the ultimate no compromise Mark Series amp. And it's promised and advertised to be what I've been hoping that the past Mesas that I've owned or spent considerable time with would be, but is it? So I've owned not one, but two studio preamps, essentially the Mark IIC preamp and a major chunk of where the legendary Mark IIC magic lives. Spent a long time with the Mark IV that the guy who actually built my Jubilee let me borrow and play for a while. Played a few shows with it. And then almost 2 years with my Mark V 90 watt that introduced the worst, just one more tweak here or there kind of feedback loop of any amp that I've ever played. And last but not least, the little baby brother, the 35 watt Mark V, which despite the bad time that I had with its big brother, it ended up being one of my favorite amps ever and kind of proved to me that yes, a Mark amp can sound great. With the EQ and controls all over the place and dialed in wrong, according to a lot of the Mesa purists out there. And it was an amp that I seriously considered buying, mainly because of its small portable size. It was convenient for shows. It had a really great crunch channel just to die for, and a great saturated high gain sound, but the 35 watt power section just didn't quite deliver the punch and the structure that I was after. So at nearly twice the price of the 35 watt version, the Mark VII comes in with that extra channel that, while I didn't need it from the 35, it was something that I wanted because as a cover band musician, sometimes you just need to hop on a super clean sound. And according to Randall Smith and Doug West, the Mark VII was stripped down to a much more simple and pure circuit compared to the Mark V. And while it does have a lot of amazing features and options, the actual channels and the tone shaping seems like it's been distilled down to a much more straightforward process. And that results in, as far as I'm concerned, a much more satisfying experience of dialing in like a really good sound and just being able to enjoy the amp. Okay, let's talk about the Mark IV and the Mark V for a second, because I was convinced that both of those amps were going to be the boogie that would get me what I wanted, and that those amps would make me not want any other amp. At least not any other amp that didn't have a Marshall logo. So the Mark IV, it was a nice evolution from the studio preamps, and it gives you that dedicated control over separate channels. And I no longer felt constrained by one shared EQ, and more importantly, I could have a nice big open clean channel and a high gain lead channel and a smooth warm crunch channel, because its lead channel didn't need the clean channel crank to get a really high gain sound. And that was kind of always the big compromise with the studio preamps. And I felt like I got one or the other, but not both of the channels sounding great. And those studio preamps absolutely hated boost pedals, so I begrudgingly had a kind of crunchy clean channel to get the high gain lead channel the way that I wanted that to sound. The Mark IV for me just felt a little bit too compressed on stage, but it had a really amazing crunch sound that I loved. And then, God, the Mark V, man, what a disappointment. No matter what cab I plugged into, no matter what different power tubes I tried, the Mark V just had this like really boxy and stuffy lower mid-range that I could not dial out to save my life. And to make matters worse, The top end was either like too harsh or it was too dark. There wasn't an in-between spot that I could really be satisfied with. So when I got the baby brother and heard how much more open it was, and the low end and the lower mid-range, and had a really nice, smooth, cutting top end, it made me think that they actually kind of redesigned that circuit. Like it was actually some kind of newly designed circuit that only shared some of the channel mode names with the big brother, rather than just being a low-powered version of that same big 90-watt version of the amps circuit. So now that brings us finally to the Mark VII, and from the minute I plugged into this thing, I have absolutely been floored. Over and over. Let's start with the sound. I've taken long enough, and if you haven't already skipped ahead to the playing, let's go ahead and hear some of the clean channel sounds in the fat mode and channel 2 in the crunch mode, and then we will come back to the discussion before moving on to the rest of the different modes there. One thing that I do want to mention is that I really like the way that the second channel feels in the 25 watt setting. This is full Class A mode, and the 45 watt mode is really nice too, but it has this really super smooth fat squish to it in the 25 watt mode. It makes digging into the notes feel super satisfying in the same magic way that the 35 watt Mark V had, that really made that amp shine for me. In the full 90 watt mode, the crunch channel is a little too stiff and better suited for more aggressive playing. So for this channel, I want that nice sag and kind of squish on the attack. And it's just kind of my feeble attempt to coax kind of some vintage Marshall type sounds from something that isn't a Marshall at all. All right, now let's take a listen to that crunch channel with the Golden Boy's blue clean boost turned on. So as you can hear, the fat mode on the clean channel has this really nice, warm, uncompressed sound with a ton of articulation, a nice thick low end, an immediate attack, almost like piano-like note response on the 90-watt mode if you really want to kind of get that really crisp, clear, immediate attack. And it's also able to be dialed in for a much smoother and warmer, like a jazz type sound, or a more sparkling, percussive, modern clean sound. So you really can cover the whole range of clean sounds. And the 3 different modes on channel 1, I think they give you a good array of sounds from like your pure crystal clear cleans all the way up to the classic and modern rock crunch sounds. Channel 2 gives a nice overlap with channel 1, providing the fat clean mode, the crunch mode, and the brand new Mark VII mode, which is described as sort of being a cross between the classic Mark amp voice with that of a rectifier amp. And the Mark VII mode is advertised as sort of the high gain voice or something like that, but I personally think that the secret sauce with this channel hits for me when you pull it back some and use Mark VII mode more as like an aggressive crunch sound, and then pair it with a really nice boost in front of the amp. I think that the amp controls in this mode, they operate radically different than in any other setting. They function more traditionally, where the treble knob raises treble, and the mids and the bass do the same thing, rather than the EQ introducing more gain the way that the knobs do for all of the other modes. Also, unlike the crunch mode, I think the Mark VII mode works a little bit better in 45 watt, the 45 watt setting, but we'll take a listen to both this channel pulled back compared to the crunch mode, both in 25 and 45 watt mode. Hit it with the Golden Boy boost, we'll see how that sounds, and then we'll kind of turn the gain up a little bit more to kind of see where that takes us. Okay, so this is the gain boost is off on the pedal, and it's exactly where we left off with the crunch channel. Boost is on. Boost is off, back to Mark VII mode. So it really does kind of overlap very nicely with the crunch channel in a way that if you don't want to fool with a boost in front of the amp, but you still want that higher gain crunchy sound, I feel like the Mark VII mode really kind of sits very nicely in that sonic pocket. But how does the Mark VII mode sound boosted with these same settings? Again, like I haven't touched anything, just going from one channel voice to the other, and it still sounds awesome. Like that did not exist on the Mark V. So let's go ahead and hear this thing boosted. All right, let's hear that exact same sound, but in the 45 watt mode. Boost is off. Let's boost it and see what happens. Boost is off. Back to the crunch mode. Still in 45 watt mode. It's got a much more immediate attack. I just like the way that it softens it up, kind of. It gives it a really nice feel, and it does cut the volume a little bit going from 45 to 25, but you can always compensate with the volume knob there. So yeah, that's gonna kind of, I think that's enough playing for channel 2 there. I think we've got a good idea of the crunch mode, the Mark VII mode, the way that it sounds boosted, which is where I spend most of my time playing on this amp. And again, just a lot of flexibility out of the second channel there, whether you're in crunch mode or Mark VII mode. As long as you have a good boost and you can kind of clean things up with the volume knob or volume pedal, you can cover a lot of range. And again, that's what sold me on the Mark V 35 watt amp. Like, the crunch mode was so incredibly flexible, and I spent the vast majority of the shows that I played with that amp on the crunch mode and hitting it with the boost for the higher gain stuff, and then pulling back on the volume pedal to clean up. And it was just, I mean, no complaints from that experience whatsoever. So I'm glad to see that it's not only exactly the same way on this amp, but with a little bit more bells and whistles and sounds thanks to the Mark VII mode. And the Mark VII mode, it does have a little bit more compression than the crunch mode, but I think it works for that type of sound really well. And if you're doing a lot of like the mid-gain crunchy hard rock stuff, and you still want a nice smooth saturated lead sound, I think that Mark VII mode is honestly the way to go. And I keep flip-flopping back and forth between it and the crunch mode in terms of which one I like. But I mean, I like them both like equally as much. There's great qualities to each of them. I think that the openness and less compressed sound from the crunch mode is its strong suit, and it cleans up a little bit better, but the Mark VII mode has a little bit more of that squishy compression and more liquidy feel under the fingers that I also really like. And again, unlike the studio preamps that I had, the Mark IV or the Mark V, like this amp works exceptionally well with all of my overdrive pedals. Like it just works and takes them great. There's no way to make them sound bad as long as you don't just absolutely crank the crap out of the gain on top of an already high gain sound from the amp, but that's gonna sound bad on any amp, not just a Mark series. Okay, now what I'm assuming that most of you are here for, let's go to channel 3 and hear a bit of what those 3 modes do, because I'm running channel 2 usually in the 25 watt mode, and I feel like running channel 3 in the 45 watt mode, it gives a slightly more cohesive feel between the two channels. Running it in 90 watts on the 3rd channel, it creates sort of this feel and response discrepancy that can make the two channels feel just a slight bit disjointed from one another. But I will flip from over to the 90 watt setting so you can hear what I mean, assuming the difference translates in the recording. Let's start with Mark II mode. I feel like this one is sort of an odd man out for this channel, but let's go ahead and hear what it does, and I'll dial it in the way that I think that it sounds the best, and then we'll go to the 2 higher gain channels. All right, Golden Boy boost. Okay, so as you heard, 2B mode really can produce a nice kind of a classic rock crunch sound, and I honestly feel like this mode is out of place on channel 3. I think that channel 2 should have been crunch, 2B, and Mark VII, and then channel 3 should have been extreme mode, 2C mode, and then Mark IV mode. 2B just feels out of place on channel 3. I mean, Randall probably had his reasons, I'm sure, but it seems like a waste to put something that sounds like that on a channel with two really, nice high gain voices. So I'm a bit torn between 2C mode and Mark IV mode. I like the more open and uncompressed, I mean, are you picking up on the trend here? Voicing that 2C mode has, but I also like the extra saturation and kind of punchier low end and lower mids from the Mark IV mode. I think that 2C mode sounds better with a boost and may give it that slight edge with flexibility, because the more compressed and saturated nature of the Mark IV mode, it gives you a little bit less headroom to work with before you start to lose a little bit of clarity if you do want to boost. However, with the extra gain from the Mark IV mode, a case could be made that a boost really isn't needed at all. And I mean, same with the Mark IIc mode. I mean, you can dial up a huge amount of saturation with that mode too, but for me, it sounds and feels better pulling the amp gain back a little bit and then slamming it with the boost to get like the really high gain, tight, percussive, fat sound. The bottom line though is that, I mean, regardless of whether it's in 2C mode or Mark IV mode, boost or no boost, both modes sound awesome. Like they both, they're easy to dial in, a lot of great sounds that are really usable. And the top end on both of these modes, it's clear, it's glassy, there's not a hint of fizz or abrasiveness. And the low end remains like nice and tight and clean and composed, even when the bass knobs are rolled up a generous amount. And my old Mark V with the same guitars and the same cabinet and same speakers, they could not dream of achieving like this sound. And if you're a Mark V owner watching and you're saying, oh, my amp doesn't have this problem, well, I mean, congrats, your amp is an exception, not the norm, because there's a lot of unsatisfied Mark V former owners out there who have found a much better sound out of the Mark VII. Okay, let's take a listen to the two other modes on channel 3 here, and I will play around with the EQ setting a little bit, and I'll make note of when, I hit the boost pedal. So 2C mode, here we go. All right, I'm tuned down to drop D, and the Golden Boy is not on right now. It will be, but we've got a little bit more of an aggressive sound dialed in here, and it's on 90-watt mode. Here we go. Let's hit it with the boost. Probably get noisy now. that is spicy. Okay, not touching anything. Let's go to Mark IV mode and hear how it compares. Can already hear noise bumped up just a little bit with that extra gain that Mark IV mode has. Let's toggle back and forth between the two modes just so we can hear what that low end change sounds like between the two modes. So you can hear that extra compression in there, and you can hear the extra gain and the extra kind of like meat on the lower end and the lower mid-range compared to the 2C mode. But again, like you can dial in a lot of low end on the 2C mode as well. But if you want it just sort of inherently built into the sound a little bit more prominently, Mark IV mode is where you want to be. Let's hear it with a boost. Boost is off. .45-watt mode. That squish is so good. I know it's not for everybody watching this video, but man, it changes the feel in a way that for someone who leans more towards the lead guitar sound, it feels really, really good to have a little bit of that give in the attack. Let's hit it with the boost now and see what it does. Let's see if it kind of gives it a little bit more of that initial snappiness to the attack back. So the initial, the note attack doesn't change, but the sharpness of the sound does. So if you want to retain kind of that extra give in the note attack, but you want like that kind of cleaner hit in the sound, then this seems like a good common, like kind of a middle ground between just the unboosted, higher gain amp setting on the 45-watt mode versus the unboosted 90-watt high gain mode on the amp. I hope that makes sense. In my head it does, but I'm not sure if it came out right. There we go. This is back on the 45-watt mode. Boost is back on. Boost is off. Oh man, it's easy to get lost playing this thing. It just sounds so good. Like literally, it just sounds good no matter where the controls or the settings, all that stuff, it just sounds good everywhere. And that's kind of been like the refreshing change of pace with this compared to like all of the other Mesas besides like the little 35-watt Mark V. That's kind of been the nice change of pace after plugging into this, is that you don't have to really work very hard at all to find a good foundational sound for all three channels in any of the modes on those channels. It just sort of sounds good right out of the gates, and from that point you're just making little tweaks here and there to really make it sound exactly how you want it. And it's been like I said, it's been a very refreshing change of pace to just be able to plug in and just like the sound, like right there out of the gates. Okay, so now that we've heard all these sounds, let's shift gears here and talk about the other huge party piece that this amp has, and that is the internal reactive load. So just like in the Badlander, this amp can be run without a cabinet, and it did so beautifully for about 3 hours at our show this past weekend. There wasn't room on the stage for a cab, so I just ran straight out using Leon Tide's IR, loaded up into the amp, and then going out to the quad cortex, and then one output to the PA, and then the other was kind of going into my FR behind me, and it was absolutely perfect. Now I won't go too much into the direct out discussion on this amp because I actually have an entirely other separate video that I've made kind of showing off this feature in more detail, along with the aux stomp, the Captor X, the quad cortex as an IR loader, and its own built-in impulse responses. So to quickly summarize the whole DI out thing, it's a quality of life feature that, like, once you have it, whether you primarily play on stage or at home, you don't ever really want to be without it again. Especially after your wallet takes a beating for paying for this thing. Like, the last thing you want to do is to go out and buy a load box for silent operation, because those load boxes aren't cheap. And for me, I don't need to drag a Pelican case with my aux box to any more shows, as long as I'm using this amp. And after spending a bit more time with the aux stomp after I recorded the DI video that I'll be uploading here soon, and sort of really getting to the point where I feel like the DI tone from the amp with that device is exactly where I want it to be, I feel like I might just be adding the aux stomp to my pedal board and just running the dry DI output from the back of the amp into that, and then right out into the quad cortex for the effects, and then to split out to the PA and FR. It keeps the setup simple, but it still delivers like a very, very good sound that's consistent for every single show. So a couple of other things here. Yes, the amp has built-in spring reverb. It's nice. It's a spring reverb, but I'm more of a plate man myself, and I just disabled the reverb altogether. And as a matter of fact, you can actually hear a difference in the sound when you disable the loop and the reverb on this amp. I mean, it's not a huge difference, but it's absolutely there. Another big deal for this thing is MIDI control. Now, while the amp doesn't have nearly as much control over the functions with MIDI as like the JP2C, you still can manipulate everything the foot switch can do with MIDI commands, I believe, as well as select impulse responses. So if you're running the cab clone output, you can hit like one switch to change the channel, toggle the loop, the reverb, the EQ on or off, and to switch to a different IR with just one switch press. So with as many sounds as this amp has, I think being able to quickly switch various things on and off, as well as manipulate other MIDI devices like multi-effects units with a single button press, it's really nice if you're willing to put the programming time in, and it's honestly not that bad once you kind of wrap your head around how MIDI actually works. One other really cool trick is that if you've got two of these things, you can control both of them by daisy chaining a MIDI cable from one amp to the other, and then using your factory foot switch or a MIDI controller to operate them in tandem, which has Perfect if you're a big baller wanting to do a big stereo setup. And if your factory 7-pin cable gets damaged, the foot switch will still operate with just a regular old 5-pin MIDI cable, but just without the actual LEDs on the foot switch working. So it's nice if you're on the road and something does happen to it and you don't have a spare 7-pin cable. Most music stores will have a typical standard 5-pin MIDI cable. All right, post-gig report. So even though I've only played one show with this thing, I can tell you that it was absolutely incredible. The Baby Mark V was an absolutely awesome amp on stage, and this is just like that much better. Setup was simple and quick. I went through a few different IR selections on the crunch and lead channel, and I really like Leon Todd's the best. The amp's voice and the structure, it just sat perfectly in the mix, and despite us using the PA that the venue had, it still sounded and worked really great, and I think that the aux stomp will make it sound even better in a couple of weeks for our next show. Okay guys, that is going to wrap up this initial review video for my new Mark VII. If you're interested in grabbing one, I will have an affiliate link to the Zounds product page down in the video description below. Keep an eye out for those open box and the blemish deals because you can save a big chunk of cash on these with those kind of deals. I will also have links to everything else that I've used in this video to make everything happen down in the video description. And once I get the neural captures made, I will try to put together a quick video on that for you guys. And I'll also be uploading the DI sound recording video here shortly so you can hear what this sounds like without the big speaker cabinet mic'd up. As always, thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.